This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Sudan's security forces stop yet another march towards the presidential palace as anti-military protests continue. As the curtain falls on 2021, we take a look back at security and stability challenges in Africa this year. And Egypt makes inoculation mandatory as it fights vaccine hesitancy. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. And with me in studio is Uche Okoronkwo with a preview of your business news.
Thank you, Lindy. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. In business, we'll take a look at the forecast for Africa's economy in 2022. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, back to you, Lindy.
Thanks, Uche. Well, let's start today's program in Sudan, where security forces have fired tear gas at protesters trying to march towards the presidential palace. The demonstrators are demanding that the military plays no role in government during a transition to free elections. Over the weekend, protesters opposed to military rule edged closer to the presidential palace despite heavy tear gas and a communications blackout. Now, according to the Central Committee of Sudanese Doctors, more than 200 people were injured during Saturday's protest, with 6 wounded by live bullets.
Powers such as arrest, search and arbitrary arrest, we completely denounce this measure. And this is the last card used by the Revolutionary Council, because they fear for our freedom. And this arrest will never break us as a resistance committee. They will arrest us, but we will not leave until we achieve civility we want for this country. And the military will not rule us anymore.
Well, let's go live now to Khartoum for the very latest on this story. And for that, we're joined by Musab Mohsin Ibrahim. Musab, tell us more about these protests and just how Sudan's leadership is responding to calls for even more demonstrations.
Yes, welcome. As we know, there's the protest today from the mid-evening. There's the protest today, and all the people, they went out on the streets asking for the rights and democracy, and they're calling for the civil government. As we know, the people are rejecting what's happening on the 25th of October, and they're refusing the dealing between the Prime Minister and the General Commander in the 21st of November. So all people, they was rejecting it. Every 2 or 3 days, they went out in the streets asking for the rights and democracy and refusing. They don't want any negotiation or any partnership or any dialogue with the military. And they believe they want really a civil government full of civilians. So the protest today was very big, and they was cut the internet connection and the cell phone connection, and they cut the international connection. We cannot receive any connections. And there was a violation against the protester in many four directions from all Khartoum, and there's the protest from many different states in Sudan. So all of them, they went out in the streets in the same time asking for the same question what people ask. So there was a violation against the protesters, and unfortunately there was being attacked to the journalists inside their studio and beat them, and this is something was unacceptable at all, and all people were refusing, and people are not allowed them to be outside in the streets and filming and doing reports. You can just do it inside the studio, and they were keeping eye on the journalists and waiting them in the studio, and that was something which could be unacceptable at all. And unfortunately, they attacked the people with the tear gas and the sound bomb, and they closed all the bridge with the chips container. That means it's very difficult for them to cross and go anywhere. They just can't protest inside their neighborhoods.
Well, it's clear tensions are very high. Thank you so much for that update, Musab Mohsin Ibrahim in Khartoum. Now, turning to Somalia, international pressure is rising on the country's president and prime minister to end their political feud. Since Tuesday, security forces belonging to politicians allied to Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble have reportedly been camping near the presidential palace. Now, following that development, Molly Fee, the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, held separate talks with Prime Minister Roble and President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo. There are growing concerns of armed clashes between their supporters. Meanwhile, the head of Somalia's army, Brigadier General Odua Yusuf Orage, has continued to urge the military to stay away from the country's political developments. Now, 4 soldiers have been killed and a dozen more seriously injured in an attack near Mali's southern border with Mauritania. Mali's army said suspected militants attacked a patrol vehicle with heavy weaponry and improvised explosive devices near the town of Nara. No group has yet claimed responsibility for the ambush. Mali, Niger and Burkina Faso are battling an insurgency that has flourished across Africa's Sahel region, killing thousands and displacing millions despite a 9-year effort by international forces to defeat it. Egypt's government has issued a decree to make COVID-19 vaccinations mandatory for everyone above the age of 18. The aim is to speed up the process of vaccination in the North African country. Yasser Hakim has more.
Egypt's vaccination rates are still lagging behind. Official statistics show that by the last week of December, only 20% of the 102 million population are fully vaccinated, and about 35% had their first dose. This is not due to a lack of doses. The North African country has worked hard on providing vaccines. It currently has over 64 million doses in stock, and more are coming Cairo's way, either imported or produced locally in partnership with China's Sinovac.
Vaccinations have played a big role in reducing the number of severe COVID cases and reducing the need to be admitted to hospitals, and this has relieved pressure off the health system in Egypt. Therefore, vaccinations have become essential to make people more immune and at the same time reduce severe hospital cases.
But many Egyptians have not been responding to vaccination campaigns, and the pace of vaccinations has been slower than the state's expectations.
The problem is that unfortunately many people have been misinformed by untrustworthy sources which spread rumors that vaccines create dangerous side effects. Though studies prove the side effects are much weaker than the benefits of vaccines, therefore creating awareness is very important to make the vaccination process effective.
And that's why the government took aggressive measures. First, it prohibited anyone from entering schools, universities or government service offices without being vaccinated, thus forcing employees, students, staff and the rest of the public to take the vaccine. And now it has made it mandatory for all people over 18 years old to be inoculated.
First of it is to vaccinate all the number of people whom have no contraindication for vaccination. So you should facilitate the vaccination process. You should include more targeted people in the vaccination process. And that's what we are doing here in Egypt. The second thing is it's very important to introduce a third dose for the people who are already vaccinated. And we did that already to reduce the age of the vaccinated people, and we did it. So we start to vaccinate people starting from age of 12 years.
And public reaction has been mixed, although most have accepted the decision.
I agree with the decision. It decreases the chances of being sick and lowers the number of cases. That's why we're much better than last year.
I would have accepted vaccinations if I would know the details about it and its effects. But personally, I can see information about vaccines are scarce. You want to force me to be vaccinated and then later I'll discover it's nothing or even harmful to me? Of course not.
Regardless, the government is going ahead with this drive, believing it would reduce the spread of the virus and its variants. It hopes the latest measures can push vaccination rates up from 35% to 48 or even 50% of the population by the first quarter of 2022. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Meanwhile, vaccines continue to arrive in Africa and many countries have ramped up distribution. However, challenges remain, preventing several countries from hitting their inoculation targets. CGTN's Wilkista Nyaba brings us some insights on how the continent is faring so far.
By 20th December, Africa had registered just over 9 million cases of COVID-19. Out of these, about 8.35 million patients recovered. To date, the continent has reported over 226,000 deaths caused by the pandemic, and vaccination coverage remains highly variable across the region. African countries have initiated vaccination programs which have administered a total of 264 million doses. But fully vaccinating 70% of Africans requires about 1.6 billion more doses. By mid-December, only 20 African countries had vaccinated at least 10% of their population, the global target the World Health Organization had set for September 2021. Only 6 countries have hit the year-end target of fully vaccinating 40% of their population, and only 2 countries, Mauritius and Seychelles, have reached the 70% coverage seen as essential for controlling the pandemic. At the current pace, the WHO estimates that it will take until May 2022 before Africa reaches 40% coverage and August 2024 before it reaches the 70% mark. China has pledged 1 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccines to African countries. This is in addition to the nearly 200 million doses that China has already supplied to the continent. The United States has also pledged 17 million doses of the single-shot Johnson & Johnson vaccine to the African Union. COVAX, the COVID-19 Vaccines Global Access Program led by the WHO and international partners, continues to receive and distribute vaccines to countries which need them. Kenya lifted its curfew in October, enabling many public spaces to operate freely once more. However, Rwanda has imposed a 10 p.m. curfew and suspended the popular mass sports and car-free days as the country grapples with a fresh wave of virus infections. Several Western countries that had previously announced travel bans against countries in Southern Africa after the discovery of the Omicron variant have since dropped the travel restrictions.
Well, the head of the World Health Organization has expressed his concern that the Omicron and Delta variants of COVID-19 together could cause a tsunami of new infections.
The virus will continue to evolve and threaten our health system if we don't improve the collective response. Right now, Delta and Omicron are twin threats that are driving up cases to record numbers, which again is leading to spikes in hospitalizations and deaths. I'm highly concerned that Omicron, being more transmissible, circulating at the same time as Delta, is leading to a tsunami of cases.
The WHO chief went on to accuse richer countries of exacerbating the pandemic by hoarding health tools like masks and vaccines. He also called for efforts to secure a 70% global vaccination rate by the middle of 2022, even if half of nations worldwide had missed the target to vaccinate 40% of their populations by the end of this year. Now, 2021 marks the 65th anniversary of China-Africa relations. Speaking to CGTN's anchor Liu Xin, Chinese Foreign Minister and State Councillor Wang Yi expressed China's support for developing countries and Africa. Wang Yi also echoed Chinese President Xi Jinping's remarks on the spirit of China-Africa friendship and cooperation. Let's take a listen.
Ministerial Conference of the China-Africa Cooperation Forum, which was successfully held in November 2021, Chinese President Xi Jinping proposed to build a China-Africa community of shared future. And China has been vowing to step up its relationship with developing countries. So what specific measures will China take to boost these relationships, including those from Africa?
This year marks the 65th anniversary of the start of diplomatic relations between China and African countries. Not long ago, we successfully held the 8th Ministerial Conference of the FOCAC despite the impact of COVID-19. President Xi Jinping put forward the spirit of China-Africa friendship and cooperation for the first time, set out 4 proposals for building a China-Africa community with a shared future in the new era, and announced 9 programs for cooperation with Africa. All this marked a new milestone in the history of China-Africa relations. Meanwhile, China's relations with other members of the developing world, including Latin America and Caribbean countries, Arab countries, and Pacific Island countries, have made important headway over the year, with fruitful results made in various areas of cooperation. China is a staunch member of the developing world. No matter how the international situation may evolve, China will unswervingly stand on the side of the developing world and unswervingly deepen mutually beneficial cooperation with other developing countries. China's vote at the United Nations belongs to the developing world. Looking ahead, we will focus on the following priorities. First, upholding the principle of mutual assistance to jointly develop a shield for immunity. China will continue to make all-out efforts to provide developing countries in need with COVID vaccines and essential supplies to ensure vaccine accessibility and affordability in developing countries and help boost their capacity, confidence, and resolve to fight the virus. Second, upholding the principle of mutual benefit to jointly develop an engine for development. We will continue to follow the principle of pursuing the greater good and shared interests, advance strategic coordination with other developing countries, increase trade and investment, and expand practical cooperation to support other countries in enhancing capacity for sustainable and self-generated development. Third, upholding the principle of sincerity, real results, amity, and good faith to jointly build a bridge for friendship. We will strengthen exchanges and mutual learning with other developing countries in the fields of political parties and political affairs, poverty reduction and development, and medical and health services, deepen friendship among the peoples, jointly safeguard the legitimate rights and interests of the developing countries, and pass on the spirit of friendship and cooperation from generation to generation.
You're watching Africa Live, coming up after the break. As the curtain falls on 2021, we take a look back at security and stability challenges in Africa this year. Plus, changing climate brings a flood of misery to South Sudan. Several African countries experienced coups and unconstitutional military takeovers in 2021. CGTN's Robert Nagila takes us through what has been a rather turbulent year for the continent.
On the last day of March, Niger's presidential guard foiled an attempted coup just 2 days before the swearing-in of a new president, Mohamed Bazoum. Calm April, and the continent was jolted further following the death of President Idriss Déby of Chad in a battle with rebels. The government and parliament were dissolved, and his son, General Mahmoud Idriss Déby, was appointed as leader by the army. A month later, in May, Colonel Assimi Goïta, who had overthrown the government in Mali 9 months earlier, overthrew the interim government. In September, President Alpha Condé of Guinea was overthrown by his own presidential guard, led by Mamadi Doumbouya.
One thing we've seen with the in this 2021, of course, is the negative consequences of the coronavirus, where already fragile, weak states has been increasingly challenged by the negative consequences of economic decline, institutions that cannot deliver and support the health sectors, increased in unemployment, and that has challenged already the gains we've had.
Those gains were seriously challenged in October when Sudan's military overthrew the transitional government, detaining Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok and his cabinet. But following massive countrywide protests, Hamdok was reinstated as Prime Minister. But with less than 8% of Africa's population fully vaccinated against COVID-19, the pandemic set to create more uncertainty on the continent in 2022. Bobot Magila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, despite these security challenges, Africa also recorded a series of successful and peaceful political transitions. Malawi, Zambia, Sao Tome and Cape Verde are some of the recent wins for democracy on the continent. Mtongana takes a closer look.
It's rare for opposition to win against an incumbent by a landslide, not just in Africa, but in the developing world too. But this wasn't the case in Malawi.
In 2019, a court nullified the polls that declared the then-incumbent President Peter Mutharika a winner and ordered a rerun. In the rerun, opposition candidate Lazarus Chakwera won the presidency with 59% of the vote to Mutharika's 40%. So what were the prevailing conditions that allowed democracy to deepen there? Large voter turnout has potential to contribute to political change. Second was the people power. Thousands of Malawians took to the streets to campaign against the 2019 election results. And lastly, the judiciary leadership. They protected the constitution and ensured the democratic will of the people prevailed. For Zambia, it's a story of resilience and resistance. Opposition candidate Hakainde Hichilema finally this year became Zambia's president after 6 attempts. His win has inspired many African opposition leaders. Cape Verde is another example. The island nation of nearly 600,000 people has boasted smooth transitions of power for the last 40 years. Critics accredit the unique two-party democracy which operates under a parliamentary system as the reason behind the solid democratic process.
Lessons from the 4 countries we've shared have led to hopes that democracy is becoming more entrenched in Africa. Mtongana, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, Africa has been hit hard by the effects of climate change over the years, forcing many countries on the continent to take action. Now, even as several conferences and summits on the subject are held across the globe, Africa is still struggling to adequately mitigate the impact of climate change. Here's CGTN's Nick Mudimba with more.
Increasing temperatures and sea levels, changing precipitation patterns and more extreme weather are threatening human health and safety, food and water security and socio-economic development in Africa. And following the disruption caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, the efforts to reduce the effects of climatic change in Africa have lagged behind. According to World Bank estimates, Africa's average annual temperature is likely to rise by an additional 3 to 4 degrees by 2099. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, by 2020, 75 to 250 million people across sub-Saharan Africa could face water shortages, and rain-fed agriculture could contract by 50% in some African countries.
Often the regions most vulnerable to climate change also suffer from insecurity, poverty, weak governance and the scourge of terrorism. Of the 15 countries most exposed to climate risk, 8 host a UN peacekeeping mission or special political mission. The effects of climate change are superimposed on conflicts and exacerbate fragilities.
According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, there's a significant regional variability in sea level trends around Africa. Sea level increase reached 5 mm per year in several oceanic areas surrounding the continent and exceeded 5 mm per year in the southwestern Indian Ocean from Madagascar eastward towards and beyond Mauritius. This is more than the average global sea level rise of 3 to 4 mm per year. Coastal degradation and erosion is a major challenge, especially in West Africa. About 56% of the coastlines in Benin, Côte d'Ivoire, Senegal and Togo are eroding, and this is expected to worsen in the future.
I think it is important that following on the heels of COP26, the Council capitalizes on the various areas of consensus obtained in order to encourage strategies that will help to mitigate the effects of climate change in accordance with its mandate to maintain international peace and security.
Key risks to agriculture include reduced crop productivity associated with heat and drought, stress and increased pest damage. The 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP26, aimed to get countries united in the fight against climate change.
I would say, however, that this is a fragile win, and we have kept 1.5 alive. That was our overarching objective when we set off on this journey 2 years ago, taking on the role of the COP presidency designate.
Africa's Agenda 2063, which was concluded in 2013, recognizes climate change as a major challenge for the continent's development.
We can't kid ourselves. We haven't beaten climate change, and it would be fatal to think that we have, because there is so much more that still needs to be done.
One promising approach throughout the continent to reducing climate-related risks and extreme event impacts has been to reduce poverty by promoting socio-economic growth, in particular in the agricultural sector. In this sector, which employs 60% of Africa's population, value addition techniques using efficient and clean energy sources are reported to be capable of reducing poverty 2 to 4 times faster than growth in any other sector. Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Authorities in South Sudan say climate change is destroying livelihoods and driving displacement. The UN says almost 900,000 people are now displaced by flooding alone in South Sudan. CGTN's Patrick Oyet has more.
Flooding in Bentiu in the north of South Sudan has forced these families to abandon their homes. They are now looking for an island on which they can temporarily settle. Those who can afford to pay for a canoe are carrying whatever they could salvage from the rising waters. Those who can't are forced to trudge through the water. For all these people, the impact of climate change isn't abstract or theoretical. It is right in front of their eyes.
We were already suffering even before the floods. There are no hospitals nearby, and now the situation is even worse. Because in order to get to the hospital, you need to travel in water for hours, and it requires money that we don't have.
In the eastern and northern parts of the country, local residents have suffered through 3 years of bad flooding. This year, 6 out of 10 states in South Sudan have been affected. The locals here tell us that the water level is still rising. About a month ago, the water level was at that tree. This place was dry, and children who are in this area used to play here, but the water has now reached here. So there is a real threat of this place, this small island, with a few number of people who are still surviving. The island can easily be overrun by water. Food is scarce and there is no land to plant crops. Fields are submerged in flood water and higher ground is overcrowded with hungry people.
The worst is yet to come, meaning come the next rainy season in the next 4 to 5 months, we may get it worse. Apart from that, our animals, in the absence of crops, because none of us are produced because of flood. In the absence of crops, we have cows, and now our cows are dying.
At the moment, many here are now dependent on water lilies and fish, but according to the United Nations, those are not sustainable food sources in the long term because access to wild foods will be reduced in the rainy season. So for now, the UN says more than half of the country's population of 13 million will be forced to depend on food aid. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Bentiu, South Sudan.
And let's now go to Uche for your latest business news.
Thank you, Lindy. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. We'll be looking at forecasts for Africa's economy in 2022.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in. Business in Africa is high risk. After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, let's start off in South Africa, where a high court has granted an interdict against Shell's seismic survey along the country's wild coast. This is the second application made in the same court to stop the company's seismic survey. Now, this comes after a court dismissed the application by activists to stop the survey on the basis that irreparable harm to marine species had not been proved. The applicants include the Amadiba, the Dwesiswebe, Port St. John's and K-Mouth communities, which are all small-scale fishing communities in South Africa. Now, in their application, the applicants argue that Shell does not have the necessary environmental authorization in terms of the National Environmental Management Act to lawfully undertake seismic exploration activities in that area. And shifting focus now, what lies ahead in 2022, given that the COVID-19 pandemic is still an ongoing threat to lives and livelihoods across the continent? Well, the IMF forecasts growth of 3.7% in 2021 and 3.8% in 2022. While that's a welcome expansion after the steep contraction of 2020, it is still, as the fund put it, the slowest recovery relative to other regions of the world. Well, here's an assessment of the growth forecast for the next 12 months.
Well, obviously, 2020 has been a hard year for Africa as the rest of the world. And the overall economy in Africa have contracted by a little over 2% in 2020. Projections seems to indicate that we will see a growth in 2021, 2022 of around 3%. But that has been, obviously this pandemic-related economic crash has had strong impact on both the economy of Africa and the society of Africa, with on the economic side an increase in debt, especially through the a large investment from some of the countries to try to quench the pandemics, up to 10% of GDP in South Africa, for example, but also in level of societal impact. There's been an increase in corruption. There's been a lot of unrest and definitely some impact on human development in many regions, especially in remote areas in African countries. African Development Bank is considering a 3.7% increase for next year in terms of the African's economy. economy, this is going to be quite unequal depending on countries. Africa relatively has actually benefited from the structure of its economy based on raw material, which was the one sector that has actually increased the fastest after the pandemic, so at least in the last few months. And so therefore, countries that are producers of mining commodities or energy actually will see an increase in their GDP. That also signifies that for other countries that were maybe a little more balanced in terms of the economy, with a stronger service industry, a stronger tourism industries, those are the ones that are still going to be facing very strong negative economic winds, and will have to be able to face the political potential impact of a lack of wealth and a lack of well-being from the population.
And heading to Senegal now, the country has unveiled its first new railway to be built since it gained independence from France. The regional express links the industrial city of Diamniadio to the capital, Dakar.
The new $1.3 billion commuter railway looks to ease traffic heading to and in Senegal's capital, Dakar. Currently, the regional express service connects Dakar to the industrial city of Diamniadio.
Today, here in Diamniadio, the emerging Senegal has taken a new step in its upward trajectory. Our march towards our emergence continues because tomorrow, the regional express will arrive at Blaise Diagne Airport, and then step by step, we will go to Thiès, to Mbour, and even further.
The railway is part of President Macky Sall's Senegal Emergent Plan, which looks to speed up the country's development.
All Dakar residents are victims of traffic jams. You lose a lot of time, you lose energy, sometimes you lose markets, you lose even in the operation of the public and private sector. It is a huge difficulty, and without the railway, you cannot go far.
The railway is expected to carry around 115,000 passengers daily. The 45-minute ride from Diamniadio will cost $3 US. Astatal, CGTN.
Meanwhile, in Nigeria, the country's public debt load has become a big talking point as it approaches the $100 billion mark, with debt service taking up well over 60% of available revenues. Many now fear that the country's debt load may become unsustainable. However, the federal government says that the debt is necessary to build the public infrastructure which the country desperately needs. Here's CGTN's Deji Bademosi with more.
Nigeria plans to spend close to $42 billion next year. But what's got people talking is the budget deficit, which is slightly more than a quarter of the entire budget. At about $15.2 billion, the budget deficit is 3.39% of the country's GDP. And to make up for the deficit, the government will have to borrow to fund the budget.
There's no way you can worship money and talk about policy and talk. People are dying. So they have to borrow money to invest. And then the thing was that we needed an expansionary policy because we went into stagflation. So at the time, the inflation was rising as well as unemployment and output collapsing. It's a different type of recession. So they had to fight it out by pouring money on it and then raising revenue for the household and all kinds of statutory forbearance on the banks and bringing down interest rate. All those measures kicked us out of recession within 1 quarter. So it's a very necessary thing to do.
As at September this year, Nigeria's total debt stood at approximately $93 billion, with additional borrowings expected to fund the 2022 budget. The figure will surely go up.
What is more worrying is that if you look at the analysis, we're borrowing to curb to spend on recurrent expenditure, and that for me is not a good thing. Today, we have excess of 90% debt to revenue ratio, and that is also very worrying. So yes, our debt position is indeed very worrying.
The government says Nigeria's debt challenge is actually a revenue one. While the country's debt to GDP ratio is currently at 35.7%, its debt service to revenue ratio is 70%. It's a clear evidence that the government will need to drive up revenues substantially for the country's debt to be sustainable.
We all have to work, not just federal government, but state governments, to increase our revenue to enhance our debt service obligations. And we also have to make sure that when we're choosing the projects, we're choosing carefully the ones that will enhance business environment so that more revenue yields comes into the treasuries of the country.
Nigeria's infrastructure needs are enormous, and with the help of borrowings, the country is gradually addressing its infrastructure gap. With the help of funding from China, for instance, the country is modernizing its railways, building roads, new aviation terminals, and many others. But many are still worried over the ballooning debt profile of the country. DG Badimosi, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Meanwhile, in Sudan, the military takeover has been met with mass demonstrations amid a groundswell of support for a civilian-led government. Now, on November 21st, the country's deposed Prime Minister, Abdallah Hamdok, signed a deal to rejoin the government after weeks under house arrest. He says his mission is to prevent the country from further bloodshed, but calls for a purely civilian-led government persists. Now, correspondent Naba Mohideen reports from Khartoum.
Been a rocky and violent few months for Sudan, as the country grapples with uncertain leadership. A military coup in October was met with widespread protests, calling for a return to civilian rule. Scores of people have been killed in clashes in the last 2 months alone, but the reinstatement of the country's civilian Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok has brought fresh hopes of reform. But the deal he struck with leaders of the military coup has been met with resistance.
We've experienced this partnership before. We were betrayed, and there's no assurances that prevent us from another betrayal. Unless we've got eyes inside the cabinet's closed doors, we'll keep protesting.
Leader of the military coup, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, insists he is committed to the new government partnership.
The deal signed with the Prime Minister last November is the only safe exit and the only roadmap to complete the transition. There is no way to go back from what has been done.
The new year should see preparations for fresh elections in 2023. Some analysts believe the reality of the situation in Sudan means elections may not happen.
We may see signs of elections, and the constitution will rule the transitional period, but holding elections needs big preparations that won't be achieved in 1 year.
The situation is volatile in Sudan's capital. Government structures still need to be formed, including Legislative Council and Elections Commission. Observers say the beginning of the new year will determine the future of this new partnership and the transition. Naba Mohideen, CGTN, Khartoum, Sudan.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but coming up in Global Business Africa, we'll be previewing how African economies fared during the year amid the challenge caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Join us for this and much more at the top of the hour. For now, let's head into a short break. My colleague Lindy Mtongana will be back with more after this.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, Well, 2021 certainly came with a number of challenges. In Ethiopia, government forces have been fighting Tigrayan rebels, while Sudan has been experiencing protests following a takeover by the military. Kenya's countdown to general elections in 2022 has somewhat begun, and the Democratic Republic of Congo has faced cases of insecurity in the east of the country. Now, here are some of the New Year hopes and expectations from people in those countries.
We have confidence that peace will be restored in the east of our country next year, following the military offensive against the rebels.
Our Kenyans, I think, are yet to be presented with a very cogent political agenda that seeks to give them an idea of what it will take for the economy to recover, for debts to be restructured, for incomes to be redistributed, and for corruption to cease. These are the things that Kenyans want to hear in terms of prosperity, in terms of values of governance, constitutionalism, the rule of law.
The political division between civilians and the generals will continue, as no one has had serious discussions that may lead to a consensus. Every party is clinging to their positions, and this means the political unrest will continue, which is a threat to the security and stability of the country. Additionally, the security laxity and tribal clashes will continue in Darfur and may extend to other regions due to the state's fragility and politicians' reluctance to take security-related decisions.
I'd like to wish them all a happy new year. This new year, I believe, will bring more peace and prosperity to Ethiopia. I know at least 1 million diaspora will return home to celebrate the holiday with us as part of showing solidarity with Ethiopia. Happy New Year to them too.
Well, as we continue looking back on 2021, we now bring you one of our favorite stories this year, the Great Wildebeest Migration. It is one of the most phenomenal natural spectacles in the world. An estimated 2 million animals move between the Serengeti National Park in Tanzania to Kenya's Masai Mara National Reserve every year. Our digital team was there to witness the event, also dubbed the 8th wonder of the world. Here's how we covered that story.
The first step in making sure any field assignment is a success is ensuring we have the right equipment to make it happen. So come with us, we're going to head over to the electronic news gathering department to see what they have in store. Well, it's just a few hours to go before our field assignment in the Masai Mara begins, and it's time to get packed. And I think I'm about ready to go. Let's hit it. So we've come well over 100 kilometers since leaving Nairobi now, and we're driving through the parched rangelands of southern Kenya's Narok County on our way to the Masai Mara National Game Reserve, where we will be reporting on this year's annual wildebeest migration. Now, the long rains of June and May are already in the past. New grass is coming up, and that's exactly what those wildebeest are on their way over from the Serengeti to find. All right, so after a long journey, we've finally arrived in the Masai Mara National Reserve, and we're ready to begin our reporting on the annual wildebeest migration. Like many of the visitors who come here, we're very eager to see our share of wild animals. After almost 5 days here in the Masai Mara, we finally stumbled upon the site that so many visitors come here to see. This unbelievable site is continuing to unfold before our very eyes as hundreds and hundreds of these wildebeest and zebra alongside them make this daring crossing over the Sand River from Tanzania's Serengeti Plain into Kenya's Masai Mara. Well, the sun is set on yet another day here in the beautiful Masai Mara, and with it comes the end of our time in this fragile ecosystem as well. I think it's safe to say that none of us here at the CGTN Africa news team will soon forget the experience of reporting on this incredible spectacle, and we all look forward to continuing to do so in the years to come.
Well, time now for a short break. Your sports news up next. Coming up, South Africa's swimming sensation Matt Sates hopes to build on from his 2021 success.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
In your sports news, Tatiana Schoenmaker captured the imagination of South Africans when she claimed gold in the 200-meter breaststroke at the Tokyo Olympics. Well, now the Rainbow Nation has another reason to smile as teenage swimmer Matt Sates plots a course of success for himself as a rising talent on the global scene. CGTN's C.S. Duplessis has more.
Matt Sates is a swimmer to keep an eye on. The teenager who started swimming when he was just 9 put the world on notice at the FINA World Cup circuit, setting the fastest time in the 200-meter freestyle in the world this year. The future appears bright for the Pietermaritzburg resident, who isn't lacking in motivation when he dives into the pool.
I wouldn't even say it's about swimming, it's about just competing. I think if I wanted to do basketball or something, or a different sport, I would have the same drive in that sport. But yeah, swimming's just always been the sport for me.
His incredible work ethic is what excites any coach. If I come onto the pool deck and I see kids like ambling up and down and not trying to get their full potential, it's a bit frustrating. But with him, you've never had to ask him. You actually have to go to him and ask him to slow down sometimes for the recovery part, you know. So when you put all of that together and then you have a month like we did last month, it was absolutely amazing, you know, because it's somebody who really deserves to achieve what he achieved.
Sates has enjoyed an incredible 6 weeks and believes that by focusing on past races, that he can learn from those experiences to improve in future performances.
But I wouldn't say I think of the other competitions too much, because if I did, I don't think I'd be training much. I think I'd be more thinking about it. So yeah, I try and keep it one day at a time type of thing. And I'll more think about the races that I've already swum than the races that I have to do.
The 2020 Tokyo Olympic debutant is hungry for more success and is backing himself to ascend to the podium in the future in the individual medley and freestyle events.
So you've got World Champs long course next year in May, and then you're going to go on to Commonwealth Games at the end of July. And we would like to aim at both of them, you know, to try and get him to get used to that racing, because it's all about the process to 2024. So Paris is quite, you know, hoping to be quite special.
Yeah, I would say seeing it happen and seeing it all go down, it's a lot more doable now to achieve a podium or to get some medals.
The 18-year-old Sates is a swimming superstar in the making. In his breakout year, he qualified for his first Olympic Games and won 13 of the 18 races he swam on the FINA World Cup circuit. And now, with just over 2 years until the next Olympics, the talented teen is earmarked to make big waves in Paris. C.S. Duplessis, CGTN, Pietermaritzburg, South Africa.
Ice stock is a new sport in Uganda. Well, it's not played on ice yet. Players have found spaces to learn and interest others in the sport. The players involved have also set their sights on fielding a team for the 2022 Ice Stock World Championships in Italy. CGTN's Leon Senyange has more.
A handle, a stalk, and a heavy throw. This is Timothy Wamoto's first attempt at playing ice stock.
It's unique. It just hit me and I'm like, wow, I have to play this.
The European sport is only weeks old here. Immaculate Nanyonyi is already hooked. It has taken her a few days of playing and her skill is admirable.
When you're throwing that stock, you have to have energy and you have to have a skill of sports because it's also a sport like any other sport around.
The game is played by throwing a stock the full length into what they call the house. To win a round, the team must have the most stocks closest to the park. While the sport is predominantly played on ice, asphalt is the best option here.
Because we don't have winter in the sub-Saharan regions of Africa, we chose asphalt and replaced plastic, or rather, we replaced rubber with plastic because when they're playing on ice, they use rubber to slow down the stocks. But on asphalt, we'd have to make them go faster.
The interest is expected to pick up, especially among university students where it has been introduced fast. But there's hope that the numbers can grow bigger.
The sport is not segregative for age or anybody like that. Anybody, any age can play the sport comfortably.
The players have set their sights on continental and international competitions like the Ice Stock World Championships in Italy next year. With that kind of determination, the possibility of sliding past other African countries like Kenya, Namibia, Gabon, Tunisia and Egypt that are playing ice stock already seems real. Leon Senyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
UEFA President Alexander Seferin has reiterated his opposition